Deep within each of us, there is a yearning to awaken our inner mystic. In this podcast, we explore topics related to metaphysics, including the law of attraction, spiritual awakening, consciousness, and ascension. We invite you to join us on a journey of awakening the inner mystic in order to unleash magic and miracles in your life.
Hi, welcome to episode 2 of Magic, the Language of the Universe. Today, we are going to be delving into the topic of symbolism and really trying to understand how this universe communicates to us through symbols. My name is Irene Schultz. I am a holistic healing practitioner and an Akashic Records practitioner.
My name is Heather Gray, and I'm a Martha Beck certified life coach.
When people start to awaken, that's when we start to really notice these things. Because I think when you awaken out of this 3D matrix is really when you start to kind of have that twinkle in your eye and that sense of awe and wonder of like, okay, there's more to this world than meets the eye. And I think that's when you start to really take notice of the things around you. I started noticing number sequences like 333, 555, 222, but I wasn't even aware of those until one of my friends started talking about these angel numbers. You know, one day she's like, oh, I keep on seeing angel numbers. I was like, ooh, what are those? Sure enough, as soon as she told me about these angel numbers, they're showing up everywhere for me. I would see the same number pattern repeatedly based on what was going on in my life. And there's a whole numerology, which I'll get into in a few moments, about what each number means and how fascinating that is. So we wanted to have a conversation about symbolism because I think it's really important to understand symbolism in order to really be able to decode these messages that the universe is sending us. And by synchronicity, again, I just happened to come upon this really cool documentary about Egypt. The name of the documentary is A Symbolist Tour of Ancient Egypt. I found it on YouTube and I kind of stumbled on it. And I'm so fascinated by Egyptology, but I love this particular documentary because it really gets behind some of the symbols that were present within the ancient Egypt culture. So in the documentary, they really looked at the symbolism of Egypt and really described it as the first veil. Basically, what that means is that there's this present black and white reality that's in front of us, but then there's really something behind that reality where we have to decode it to make sense of it. It's kind of like reading between the lines. They said that through an understanding of symbolism, that the Egyptians were really able to tap into wisdom, and they use symbolism to reflect that wisdom in their culture. And it was reflected in all aspects of their life, including their temples and their gods and just their rituals and everything. They described a symbol and how it speaks to a different part of the brain than does ordinary writing or language. It speaks to the right brain, which is the intuitive, nonverbal, visual brain, which deals with spatial and abstract relationships and with intuition and the subconscious mind. So it's really this part of the brain that is not bound by rational linear logic. It's also thought to be the part of the brain which is host to our higher selves and our innate divinity. So the language of symbolism really serves as a bridge between the two hemispheres of the brain, and they called it the polarity of intelligence, which is basically the two hemispheres combined. When you decode a symbol, it involves the cooperation of both hemispheres of the brain. And through the balance of coordination and simultaneously managing of both types of the right and left hemisphere, basically, that's when this new invisible world of symbolism opens up to us and we're able to decode it. They were saying that a symbol is a very sophisticated and brilliant means for being able to transmit very complex messages. And that's why the Egyptians used symbols, because it was really hidden within all of their hieroglyphs and their images that they had painted on their temple walls. And it really allowed people who experienced their temples and their culture to intuitively see what was not directly visible in the material world.
Yes, and I've noticed that symbolism is not only at play in the ancient Egyptian culture, but also throughout all ancient spiritual texts, the Bible, the Tao Te Ching,
the Bhagavad Gita,
and mythology, the Bhagavad Gita, everything. It's imbued with symbolism. And I think the reason why is because, and it's just what Irene just talked about, is because that symbolism gets into the right brain and you can understand it in your body. It becomes an experience because if they use symbolism and story and mythology and poetry, you can experience it as a feeling in your body rather than trying to understand it with your logical left brain. I ran across this quote about the Tao. Lao Tzu says the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. Like words pale in comparison to what the divine is, but metaphors and symbolism and like emotional language can get closer to it.
Right.
Than just just explaining it.
Right.
Straight up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. It's almost like we need our right and our left brain to fully download wisdom. We can maybe understand it to a certain degree with our logical minds, but it's really that right brain needs to be engaged in order to fully get to the point where you can embody new knowledge.
So that it's visceral, and then your left brain can interpret what you just experienced through your body and your senses.
Right.
Yeah.
And so because we've been cut off from the right brain for so many years, it was hard for us to be able to see the world through this eyes of, well, maybe there's something deeper going on here, you know, as far as like being able to look at the symbology of different cultures and even mythologies, right? Like maybe these myths weren't meant to be taken literal. Maybe the Bible's not meant to be taken literal, but our minds always want to do that. Our minds always want to interpret everything literally, but maybe it's open to the interpretation of the person who can make meaning of it based on where they are in their evolution and how whole they are and how integrated their right and left hemispheres are.
You're exactly right. And it means different things to different people. Let me bring up the resurrection. It could be literal, like Jesus rose from the dead, but it could also be taken as that's our cycle of life. We come into this body and then we pass away and then our spirit goes back to where it came from and rises. Like that's what the resurrection symbolizes, the rising or evolution until the spirit form again, and then we come back. It's a cycle. It's a cyclical thing. To me, I think that's what the resurrection symbolizes, is that as well.
Yeah. You can extract multiple meanings, you know, because it's interesting because the way I interpret the resurrection is it's when your consciousness rises, like when you are reborn into a new spirit. It's like when you fully start to embrace your spirit. Because I think a lot of times we're like these walking zombies that are just acting out of default, but it's not until that spirit starts to resurrect or come back online
and rise,
and it's like your whole rising. It's like you rise out of that what was once, quote, asleep,
or
right?
Death, like
death,
a walking
sleep,
dead.
Yes. And then you are born into this new spirit where that's when you start to really embody your essence and your spirit and you step into your divine power.
I love that.
Yeah. And
I
so there's so many
about it that way.
Yeah,
I love it.
But you can interpret both the same way. I mean, resurrection can have more than one meaning, and that's symbolism, right? I mean, it doesn't just have to take on one meaning. And what's interesting is, God, we could go down a serious rabbit hole on this, guys. But I mean, so a symbol to one culture might be taken differently to another culture, right? For example, like a red cardinal for Catholic people can symbolize the Pope or the blood of Christ. But then to another culture, red might symbolize the chariot or the fire energy or something completely different. Depending on what your culture is, that's how the symbols manifest themselves. It's like spirit is communicating in our love language. It's reaching us where we are So if you think that cardinals are about the blood of Christ, then that might be something that shows up in your life if you're Christian. But if you're some other religion, it's going to have a totally different meaning. It's going to play out in your life differently.
Well, it can be archetypal and it can be personal.
Right.
For instance, my sister went to an intuitive and he told her that our grandmother manifests to her, she passed, and that she manifests to her as the symbol of the cardinal. So to her, it's very personal.
Yeah, right. And so obviously nobody else is your grandma. So, I mean,
well, it's just a way of communicating. It's like what you decide on, the language that you decide on to communicate with the universe. And the universe gets it. It'll reciprocate that language of symbolism.
Right. Yeah.
I was watching Joseph Campbell in The Power of Myth, and he tells a story about the symbol of the snake and how the snake in our culture gets a bad rap because of the story of the garden of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Like they pass the buck to the serpent. Like it's all his fault. It's like the guy, Adam, this dude, Adam says, nope, it's Eve's fault. And Eve said it was the snake. And so the snake gets a bad rap in our culture, but in many cultures, the snake is revered. In fact, the snake in the archetypal mind represents transformation, which is a very positive symbol.
But it's interesting because there's a dualistic nature in snakes, right? Because it can be seen, there's some polarity there. But what's interesting is that my daughter made this really amazing point the other day. Like she's 15, but I swear she has the mind of like an 84-year-old college professor.
She does.
Or the wisdom of that. But she says, what's interesting about snakes, Mom? Because we were talking about how we both had these dreams about snakes and, what could that possibly mean? Well, did you know that venom can either be poison or it can be medicine? Venom, it can either kill you or it can save you.
That's an interesting point. Another thing that we want to talk about is metaphors, which goes right along with symbolism. So things show up in your life as a symbol to show you where you need to heal or maybe your next life path. And the thing about the universe is it's all symbolic. Everything can be a symbol, and our world is made up of symbols. When we speak to the universe, when you pray, when you talk to the divine, we use words, and those are symbols. And we also use imagery, what we create, what's in our minds, and we create with words. And so when we put that imagery in our minds and when we put those words and thoughts out there, the universe will mirror back to us what we've got going on in our mind with our words and our imagery. And so there is a tool that I learned during my Martha Beck coach training is called the metaphor tool. And what the metaphor tool is if you're having a struggle or a difficulty in your life, say it's financial troubles, I will ask the client, is it a person, a place, or a thing? What does it show up as? And I'll ask them to relax and get into a meditative state. And whatever image comes to their mind, that's what we go with. And we just kind of play around with it. For example, let's say they're dealing with financial struggles, and what do you see this financial struggle as? And they see this giant treasure chest wrapped in chains with a padlock on it that they can't open. So then we just kind of play around with that energy. I get them into their right brain so they can explore this metaphor to see how this financial struggle is showing up in their life, because their left logical brain is telling them a story about their finances. And it's probably a story you've been telling yourself since childhood. But if you get your right brain involved, you can dig deeper into the unconscious and what's truly going on. So maybe in the metaphor tool, I would lead them through this meditation to where they would somehow find the key and unlock the treasure chest, and they would have a big breakthrough. So it could go in an infinite number of ways, but using that metaphor to unlock the puzzles of your life can sneak past that left brain to help you figure out at a deeper level what you need to do to move forward.
It's funny because when I started working with you, I did not realize how metaphors can really represent, like anything can play out as a metaphor. I remember I had this situation where I had this bottle I was cleaning my basement, which to me represented the unconscious mind. Like I was cleaning out all this baggage.
I love that. And you're the one that pointed that out. Like the room in the house, your house that represents the subconscious is your basement. It makes so much sense.
Because it's like you've got stuff hiding down there, right? That you don't want to look at. You just want
That's where you put all your junk.
Clutter and junk and stuff that you just don't want to look at or deal with, right?
So I'm thinking of my basement right now. I'm in trouble.
So anyway, and as I was cleaning up my basement, just arranging some shelves and getting rid of some things. So we had this small pantry in our old house. So we kept a lot of bigger Costco-sized items in the basement. And we had this huge container of balsamic vinegar, and it was in this bottle, and it was good quality vinegar. Well, anyway, as I'm rearranging the shelf, it like falls on my ankle and it cuts me. And I get this big cut on my left ankle. So I did this exercise with Heather where we had to look at the symbolism of that and how, the ankle actually represents the flexibility to move forward in life. Because at that point, we were cleaning the basement to kind of make room and get rid of stuff so we could move to a new house. Because we had to pack all of our belongings and store them in boxes. And we just didn't want to carry all this stuff that we didn't need.
I remember now. It's been a really long time. But your ankle was your resistance of moving forward to this new house.
And the vinegar was stinging. It was like there's this stinging quality to this process of like this sour quality, this process of getting rid of the quote baggage. So even something like that can play
that's
out
very positive.
Right.
Can also have that like the bittersweet, right?
Right. And a lot of you might be thinking like, well, okay, that's a far fetch. But I'm telling you, once you start analyzing this stuff, it's crazy how the subconscious mind speaks to you. And a lot of the things that you're holding down deep in there, it just suddenly you have these epiphanies.
And I just want to tell you all this quote from the Course in Miracles that I just love, just to reiterate that this is supposed to be normal and natural. So this is straight from the Course in Miracles. To Irene and I, miracles and magic are synonymous. So miracles are natural. When they do not occur, something has gone wrong. When you start looking for miracles, they appear everywhere.
Yes.
So
just like magic.
Just like magic. Yes.
Yeah. And, and I think a lot of times we define miracles as like it has to be some miraculous healing, and I've actually had those healings happen to me with Body Talk. I mean, I actually healed my umbilical hernia literally overnight. I mean, it was gone, like here one day, gone the next. So, I mean, I've had those kinds of miracles in my life, but we're not necessarily talking about those miracles. I mean, most of the time it's just the little miracles. It's the little grace smiling down on you. You're in a bad state of mind and all of a sudden that hummingbird shows up to kind of remind you that spirit is always there with you and holding your hand through the process of life.
Yes.
Those are the miracles that we're talking about.
And another quote from the Course in Miracles is there is no order of difficulty in miracles, like the tiny things and the big things.
Yeah. So moving mountains is about as easy as seeing that hummingbird or something smaller that your mind would perceive as less important.
That's right. It's all our belief system around it. One thing that Irene and I have noticed, and Irene talked about this earlier, about the angel numbers and the number synchronicities that show up in your life once you start focusing on miracles. And then once you become aware of it, and each number represents a certain thing. And once your mind, your left logical brain becomes aware of it, then the universe will respond to you with that language because it knows that you understand the symbols.
Right. Yeah. So I did some research on numerology because, like I said, it was showing up for me with number sequences, usually in sequences of 3. So, for example, I would see 222, 555, 777. And so, it was always like those what they call or what they term angel numbers. But I did a little bit of background research on just numerology as a whole. And so I found out it was the study of the numerical value of the letters in words, names, and ideas, and that there was a divine relationship between numbers and one or more coinciding events. So for example, and those numbers can take on different flavors in different contexts, right? So if you see an angel number, like take, for example, 555. So the number 5 in itself has a lot of different meanings, but in general, it is the number of change. A few years ago, I was suddenly going through a lot of change in my life. That's kind of where I was doing a lot of healing from some past wounds. I was moving from one house to another. And so 555 was showing up like crazy in my life. I mean, I would see it on the clock. I would get it in receipts. I mean, down to even when we signed on our new house with the realtor, we were at Starbucks and we filled out all the paperwork to finally put the contract in to actually purchase this current house that we're in. And I can remember, and I was just happened to be telling the realtor about these number synchronicities because we had put an offer in on a certain date and it was like all this stuff around it, this astrology and this numerology stuff. So I go and get this coffee and the coffee comes to 555. And I'm like, see, there it is. It's showing up again. And it's funny because 555 doesn't show up for me anymore because that's not relevant in my life. I don't have a lot of change necessarily going on in my life now. There's other things going on where different numbers are showing up. Another really fascinating thing that I learned, so I was on this particular website and I learned about how there's a numerology in your address. So when you look at the digits of the number part of your address, so for example, if you live on 52 Smith Street, okay, so if you take 52, so you add 5 and 2, which reduces it to 7, its smallest amount.
And
so
7 is the number of luck. Like we all know that. I mean, that's pervasive. We all know that 7 is the number of luck. Yes.
Well, it's interesting because when I looked at this, I looked at the numerology of that house that I used to live in. That number started with 5171, which could be reduced down to 5. But also I found out that it also could be represented as 14, which is a master number. And that's where you get 5, the 4 and the 1. Mm-hmm. Well, what I found out is that when you live in an address that encompasses the energy of 5, in this case, it's not necessarily about change. It takes on a slightly different flavor. And when it's plugged into an address, it's a place that you're going to live in to have fun and more carefree, and you're not going to be as focused. You're not going to be as career driven. And there's also karma around the number 14. It's a karmic number.
Okay.
Well, what's interesting is based on the history of my house, swingers used to actually live in my old house. Yeah. And
really?
Yeah.
I hope you saged after you found out. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. And then also, it was just kind of at a stage in my life where I wasn't taking my spiritual work too seriously. I was just kind of like, okay, going through the motions. I was raising my kids. And what's interesting, another thing they said about 5 energy is it's very much about addictions. And that was when I was really at the peak of my eating disorder. Is I was really struggling with that when I used to live in that house. And so it just all made sense. And what's interesting with this current house, it's the number 11, which is an energy that helps you develop your intuition and it fosters spiritual healing and growth. So it's just interesting how even the numbers of my home are playing out in my life. How about this? What we'd love to do is have you guys do some research on what your address is. And why don't we include the link to the website that I found that talks about the different addresses and the numerology behind it. And we'd love for you guys to share your story about what your address means and anything that you've noticed that is consistent with the energy of that numerology of your address. Because I just think this stuff is so fascinating.
It is fascinating. We would love to hear it. We would love to hear.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. Please like us on YouTube and like us on Facebook and Instagram so you can get information about our latest podcast. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Love you all.